you gentlemen have been through a lot. When you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch! Welcome to the new show. I'm Random Rob, and tonight it's a tale of two things. The Thing from Another World from 1951, and John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. What can we learn from these two movies? Now here I'm looking at the original John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There? And I think I would agree with screenwriter Bill Lancaster's assessment. Who Goes There is a science fiction story that's revered, although it's not the most effective in what it's trying to do. It ends rather abruptly, and it comes from John W. Campbell, who is sort of a notoriously difficult figure to get around in science fiction, in that he really helped jumpstart the pulp genre of sci-fi writing, but as an editor of pulp sci-fi was very controlling about the kind of material that he allowed to be written, and he had a number of unpleasant views on certain social subjects, and he's kind of a difficult figure. But Who Goes There is important because it's one of the first sci-fi stories to deal with a shape-changing life form, and the story was really a great springboard to develop ideas off of. Both the 1951 film and the 1982 film do just that, but in very different ways. The 1951 film, The Thing from Another World, was directed by Christian Nyby and Howard Hawks. Was written by Charles Lederer. One of the first things you notice if you watch The Thing from Another World today is that the writing in the film is terrific. Almost every scene in The Thing from Another World involves at least 6 people crammed in a room talking over the top of one another. And so much of the dialogue sounds spontaneous, it's hard to believe that it was actually a screenplay. You know, modern films tend to be more driven by 1 or 2 characters speaking in any given scene. It's just a whole different headspace that The Thing from Another World creates. And it's really fun. The Thing from Another World is a fun movie. There's so much wry dialogue in it. There's so many memorable, quotable lines in it. It's really less of a horror movie than more a survival story, with this team of scientists in the Arctic working proactively to try to stop this creature and figure out what's going on. The most interesting conflict that occurs in the film is a split in leadership between the team of scientists and the military men. That the lead scientist, Dr. Carrington, is obsessed with trying to communicate with this otherworldly creature to try to learn its secrets because it's so much more advanced than we are. Even though it's pretty obvious early on that the thing is very malevolent and just intends to kill everybody on the base and bleed them dry for their blood to plant its seedlings. This is one of the interesting points about The Thing from Another World is the writers and the filmmakers knew they could not depict a shape-changing life form. The special effects technology, it would have just been too expensive, too experimental. You know, they might have gotten a couple of things right, but there was no way they could do the kind of things that the story called for. So rather than do that, they had to try to make the creature different. They tried to make a scientific version, if you will, of a vampire. The Thing is a plant creature. It reproduces itself through seed pods that have to be fed blood. And we see this in one of the more gruesome scenes in the film where it's actually like cut open a dog and has drained it of its blood to feed its seedlings. Hidden, not too obviously, in the greenhouse of the base. Interestingly enough, there was going to be a scene in the film where they actually found one of the scientists hung upside down with his throat cut, and it was cut because it was, you know, considered to be way too gory for 1951. That was going to be a scene in the film. So the monster in the 1951 film is a hybrid. It's a vampire. It's radioactive, so they can detect it when it's coming with a Geiger counter. Sort of harkens back to Alien and Aliens with the motion detectors. The Thing has, I think, one of the first uses of a jump scare in a film where the creature is right behind a door that one of the characters opens after like a extended 10-minute scene of dialogue where you don't think anything's going to happen, and suddenly the creature's right there. The outdoor sequences in the film were shot in Glacier National Park in Montana. This is one detail that both the films share, is that they used locations that ideally approximated Arctic conditions, and it really adds something to this story. It's not just being trapped with a monster, it's the fact that you are at the North Pole or the South Pole, and nobody is coming to help you. That sense of isolation. The Howard Hawks film suffers a little bit less from this just because it has so many characters and so much humor in it. The Carpenter film from 1982 took a much more apocalyptic, darker take on the story. It had groundbreaking makeup effects by special makeup effects man Rob Bottin, who actually worked so hard on the project he gave himself nervous exhaustion and had to be hospitalized for a while. Features one of Phil Tippett's early puppets, who would later go on to do a lot of the stop motion effects in Star Wars. And Carpenter was much more interested in a story where the creature, by its very nature, ended up exploiting the paranoia and the social breakdown that its introduction into this group causes. Basically, once the Thing arrives at the base in the 1982 movie, everyone is doomed. And what's most interesting about it is it's almost as if the more they discover about how the creature kills people and copies them, the worse the paranoia gets. And the group ends up, tearing themselves apart by the end of the film, for the most part. And it's hard to understate how despised John Carpenter's film was when it was first released. I remember I was too young to see it when it came out. I had a close friend who went to a screening and said that by midway through the movie, people were hiding under their seats, people crawling on the floor up the aisles to get out of the theater. The Thing really grossed out movie audiences. It really scared the hell out of them, and not in a good way. And it got a lot of hate from critics, which is too bad, because a lot of that was just popular culture of the moment, because E.T., the extraterrestrial, had been such a big hit that summer. People were getting all doe-eyed thinking about kind, benevolent aliens, and here was John Carpenter just absolutely blowing the lid off the idea of a malevolent alien creature. And it makes me sad. It makes me sad that Rob Bottin did not get an Academy Award for special makeup effects, which was not a category yet. I would have given the film an award for special effects, period. To this date, I don't think anyone has ever done more effective practical horror makeups in a film. Makeups that moved and did all these, incredible things. I think the CPR sequence kind of stands alone to me as one of the greatest shock horror makeup effects extravaganzas ever done in a horror movie. But there were other things people didn't like about the film, and one thing was by design, and specifically the way the film was edited. It was done in a way to play down the emotional and human characteristics of the characters, to keep the audience guessing about who was still human and who wasn't, and making the line very blurry. The first time you watch John Carpenter's The Thing, there's that point around midway through the movie, you're not sure if MacReady has been taken over by the way they shoot him and light him in a few scenes. There was even such animosity for the film that they gave Ennio Morricone a Razzie for Worst Soundtrack of the Year. Now, I always thought that was just kind of out of left field. I can't think of too many horror movie soundtracks that fit the material better than the music in John Carpenter's The Thing. There's this sadness to it that just feeds into the idea that the destruction of these people by this life form is just inevitable. And if you haven't heard the expanded score with some of the original material that he wrote for it that wasn't used, the complete track called Humanity is just an amazing piece of music by itself. A really important and groundbreaking film for horror. It has such a strong apocalyptic tone to it. And for me personally, I still think it's the best film John Carpenter ever did, just in terms of production values. All the money that they spent on the thing, it's all on the screen. You know, I was such a geek about this film. I was so happy when it came out on Blu-ray, just so that I could see the little color variations in the snow scenes, which never looked that great on VHS. Another point I want to mention about the Carpenter movie is that when it came out, I remember there were associations being made by some critics and some in the press that the film was a metaphor for AIDS. I never really got that, and I don't think it really holds up under examination. AIDS in 1982 was barely on the fringes of the public radar. It wasn't until it really started to burn through Hollywood in the mid-80s and some high-profile actors were dying of it that it got the public attention it deserved. I don't know, maybe people were watching a horror movie that had to do with like blood and, you know, people getting needles stuck in them in some scenes. I mean, made them think about disease. I don't know, I just never found it a credible point. But in conclusion, I want to say that these are two film adaptations that are really worth watching back to back, just to compare the expressiveness of the Hawks film to the repressiveness of the Carpenter film, and the completely 180-degree difference in mood that they use with the material, and yet both films work really well. And that's something that's pretty rare. And just fascinating to look at what the imagination of the writers and the creators of the film was channeled into in each project. There's so much you can learn about style from looking at these two films. Well, that wraps up my little talk about The Thing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you're hearing, please press the like button and hit subscribe, and please consider becoming a patron of the new show through my Patreon account, which you can link to on my YouTube page for my channel. Well, thanks for stopping in. I'll see you in 2 days with a new episode of the new show, and until then, this is Random Rob signing off. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.